Blood pooled on the linoleum floor of my cold, empty kitchen in 2005. The final result of 18 years of blind devotion to a man who despised me, Dylan Edward. My decorated Army husband was marrying his pregnant mistress while I choked on my last breath. But death wasn't the end. My eyes snapped open to the smell of cheap hairspray and burning pot roast. It was November 14th, 1987. I was back. This time I wouldn't just survive, I would destroy them. Catherine, are you deaf or just utterly useless? The shrill nasal voice ripped through my skull like a rusted nail. I gasped, my hands instinctively flying to my throat, where the crushing weight of a pulmonary embolism had suffocated me just moments before. But there was no pain. My fingers didn't brush against the wrinkled, graying skin of a 50-year-old woman broken by decades of neglect. They touched the smooth, taut skin of my youth. I blinked against the harsh yellow fluorescent lighting. The air was thick with the suffocating scent of burnt carrots and Martha Edwards' signature, overly sweet gardenia perfume. I was standing in the cramped kitchen of the military housing unit at Fort Bragg. The hideous yellow floral wallpaper, the linoleum counters that I used to scrub until my knuckles bled, the ticking sunburst clock on the wall. It read, 5:45 p.m. Catherine, the roast is smoking, God in heaven. Dylan works his fingers to the bone defending this country, and you can't even manage to take a piece of meat out of the oven. I turned slowly. Standing in the doorway was Martha, my mother-in-law. She looked exactly as she had in my nightmares. Her stiff, heavily lacquered bouffant hair, immovable, wearing a garish turquoise blouse with shoulder pads so sharp they could cut glass. Her face was twisted in that familiar sneer of absolute disgust. Memory hit me with the force of a freight train. November 14th, 1987. This was the night of the promotion dinner. In my past life, this was the night Martha had intentionally turned the oven dial up to 450 degrees when I went to the bathroom, ruining the dinner I had spent 2 days preparing for Dylan's commanding officers. It was the night Dylan pulled me into the hallway, his fingers digging so hard into my biceps they left bruises, and hissed that I was an embarrassment to his uniform. It was the night they broke my spirit, convincing me I needed to hand over the $50,000 my late father had left me to compensate for my failures and help Dylan buy his way into the good graces of the top brass. I had wept. I had begged for forgiveness. I had signed the check. And 10 years later, I found out he used that exact money to buy a secret lakeside cabin for his mistress, Beatrice Gallagher. "Are you having a stroke, girl?" Martha snapped, marching toward the oven. She grabbed a dish towel and yanked the oven door open. A plume of thick, acrid black smoke billowed out. "Look at this. You've ruined it. You've ruined Dylan's entire evening. You spiteful, incompetent little—" "I didn't touch the dial, Martha." My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. It wasn't the trembling, mousy squeak of the 22-year-old girl desperate for her new family's approval. It was ice cold. It was the voice of a woman who had died alone on a kitchen floor. Martha froze the charred roasting pan halfway out of the oven. She whipped her head around, her beady eyes wide with shock. "Excuse me. What did you just say to me?" "I said I didn't touch the dial." "You did. When I went to the washroom at 5:30. I took a step toward her, my posture straightening. I realized for the first time in my life that I was a full 3 inches taller than her. "You turned it up to broil because you couldn't stand the thought of me actually succeeding tonight." Martha dropped the pan. It hit the floor with a deafening crash, splattering black boiling grease onto my shoes. "You lying little tramp, Dillon, get in here." Heavy, polished boots thudded against the hardwood hallway. Dillon appeared in the doorway. He was devastatingly handsome, wearing his impeccably pressed dress blues, his sandy blonde hair cropped high and tight. My heart, which had fluttered for this man for nearly 2 decades, felt nothing but a cold, heavy dread. I looked at his hands, the same hands that would sign divorce papers on my deathbed, without a second glance. "What the hell is going on in here?" Dillon barked, looking at the mess on the floor. His eyes darted to his mother, instantly softening, before snapping to me with an icy glare. "Catherine, what did you do?" "She accused me of sabotaging your dinner," Martha shrieked, clutching her pearls in a performance worthy of an Oscar. "She burned the roast on purpose, Dillon, and then she looked me dead in the eye and called me a liar." Dillon took 2 long strides towards me. His jaw was clenched, a muscle feathering in his cheek. This was the moment I was supposed to cower, the moment I was supposed to apologize. "Clean it up," Dillon ordered, his voice dangerously low. "Clean it up right now. Go upstairs and do not come out until the guests have left. I will tell the general you are ill. Tomorrow we are going to have a very serious conversation about your behavior and that money your father left." No. The kitchen went dead silent. Only the hissing of the grease on the hot oven door could be heard. Dillon blinked, actually taken aback. "What did you say?" I said no. I reached over to the counter, picked up the floral apron I had meticulously embroidered with my own initials, and dropped it onto the pool of black grease on the floor. "I'm not cleaning it up. I'm not hiding upstairs. And you are never ever touching a single dime of my father's money." Dillon's face turned purple. He reached out to grab my arm, the exact same motion he had used in my past life. But this time I knew it was coming. I stepped back smoothly, his hand grasping empty air. "Don't touch me," I warned, my eyes locking onto his. For a split second, I saw genuine fear flicker in his gaze. He didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. Good. "You are my wife," Dillon sneered, trying to recover his dominance. "You live under my roof. You obey my orders. I am a civilian Dillon, not one of your privates. And as of this moment, I am done." I walked past him, intentionally bumping his shoulder hard enough to make him stumble slightly. "Catherine, if you walk out that door, do not bother coming back," he roared as I reached the entryway. I paused, grabbing my leather purse from the hall table. Inside was my checkbook, my identification, and the keys to my 1984 Ford Fairmont. "That's the plan, Dillon," I said, not looking back. "Enjoy the charred meat." I walked out the front door into the crisp North Carolina autumn air. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind me, severing the chains of my past life. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The air tasted like freedom. I had 48 hours before banks opened on Monday. 48 hours to secure my fortune, gather my evidence, and prepare for war. The weekend passed in a blur of cheap motel coffee and legal pads. I rented a room under my maiden name Wright on the outskirts of Fayetteville. I didn't cry. I didn't mourn the marriage. You cannot mourn something you already watched rot for 20 years. Instead, I planned. By 8:45 a.m. on Monday morning, I was parked outside the heavy oak doors of the First National Bank of Georgia. I watched the suited employees unlock the doors. In 1987, $50,000 was enough to buy a beautiful house outright. It was my father's life insurance, the last piece of him I had left. In the previous timeline, Dillon had convinced me to put it into a joint account, claiming it would build our credit. By 1990, the account was empty. I walked straight to the manager's office. Mr. Henderson was a portly, balding man who had been a good friend of my father's. "Catherine? My dear, what a surprise," he said, standing up to shake my hand. "How is military life treating you?" "It's opened my eyes, Mr. Henderson," I said smoothly, taking a seat. "I need to make some immediate financial changes. I want to transfer the entirety of my father's trust into a private single-signer account. Furthermore, I need to withdraw the $10,000 currently sitting in my joint checking account with Dylan." Henderson looked taken aback. "Catherine, the joint account, withdrawing the entirety of it? Does Dylan know about this?" "Mr. Henderson." I leaned forward, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Dylan is facing some internal disciplinary issues. Rumors of gambling off base. I am trying to protect my father's legacy before the military auditors freeze his assets." It was a lie, but it was highly effective. Henderson's eyes widened, and his loyalty to my father instantly overrode his banking protocols. "Say no more, Catherine. We will get this secured immediately." By 10 a.m., I walked out of the bank with a cashier's check for $50,000 in a new unbreachable account and $10,000 in cash stuffed into my handbag. Dylan's joint account was left with exactly $5.12 to keep it active. Let him try to buy the general's favor with that. My next stop was a high-end boutique downtown. I caught a glimpse of myself in the store's window. Long, mousy brown hair tied in a frumpy ribbon, a high-collared prairie dress that Martha had insisted respectable wives wore. I looked like a victim. "Can I help you, ma'am?" the saleswoman asked, eyeing my outdated clothes with mild disdain. "Yes," I said, pulling a crisp $100 bill from my purse and laying it on the glass counter. "I need something that commands a room, and point me to the nearest salon that knows how to cut hair, not just spray it." 3 hours later, Catherine Edward, the dowdy military wife, was dead. Staring back at me in the salon mirror was a woman I barely recognized. My hair had been chopped into a sleek shoulder-length bob dyed a rich, expensive chestnut. I wore a tailored crimson-red skirt suit with a sharp blazer that accentuated my waist paired with sheer black stockings and black leather pumps. I applied red lipstick, a shade Dylan had explicitly forbidden because it looked cheap. I looked dangerous. I drove toward the heart of town. It was time to deal with Beatrice. Beatrice Gallagher wasn't just any mistress. She was the daughter of General Montgomery Gallagher, Dylan's commanding officer. She was blonde, 24, dripping in daddy's money, and carried herself with the smug entitlement of a woman who had never been told no. In my past life, I hadn't found out about her until Dylan demanded a divorce long after she had drained him dry and left him, which ultimately left me footing the bill for his medical debts when his health failed. I knew her routine. Every Monday at 1 p.m., she had lunch at the Palmetto, an exclusive country club restaurant. I parked the Fairmont a block away and walked in. The maitre d' tried to stop me, but I flashed a $50 bill and pointed to the patio. "Just looking for a friend." I spotted her immediately. She was sitting under a striped awning, wearing a pastel yellow sundress, laughing over a glass of iced tea. And sitting across from her, holding her hand across the white linen tablecloth, was Dylan. A cold smirk played on my lips. He was supposed to be on base doing inventory. Instead, he was here kissing the knuckles of the general's daughter, no doubt weaving a sob story about his unhinged wife who had run away. I didn't storm over. I didn't scream or throw a drink in his face like a scorned woman in a soap opera. That was what they wanted. They wanted me crazy. Instead, I walked over to a payphone near the restrooms. I dropped a coin in and dialed the front desk of the military police headquarters at Fort Bragg. Military Police Sergeant Miller speaking. "Yes, Sergeant, I said, putting a terrified tremor in my voice. "I need to report an incident. I'm at the Palmetto Country Club. There's an officer here, Captain Dylan Edward. He's highly intoxicated, becoming belligerent and harassing the patrons. I think he might be carrying his sidearm." "Ma'am, stay calm. We'll send an MP unit immediately." I hung up, wiped my fingerprints off the receiver, and walked back out to the patio. I took a seat at a corner table, partially hidden by a large potted fern, ordered a black coffee, and waited. 15 minutes later, the screech of tires echoed from the parking lot. 2 stern-faced military police officers marched onto the patio. The quiet murmur of the country club died instantly. "Captain Edward!" The lead MP barked, marching straight up to Dylan's table. Dylan jumped, dropping Beatrice's hand as if it were on fire. "Officers, what is the meaning of this?" "Stand up, Captain. We received a report of intoxicated and disorderly conduct. We need you to step outside immediately." "Intoxicated? I'm drinking iced tea." Dylan protested, his face flushing crimson as every wealthy socialite on the patio turned to stare. Beatrice looked mortified, hiding her face behind her menu. "Captain, do not make this difficult. Step outside now." The MP rested his hand on his belt. "Do you know who I am?" Dylan hissed, panic setting in. "Do you know who she is? This is General Gallagher's daughter." The MP raised an eyebrow. "Sir, I don't care if it's the president's daughter. You are coming with us." They hauled Dylan out of his chair. He was sputtering, furious and humiliated. As they dragged him past my corner table, his eyes locked onto mine. He froze. He took in the red suit, the sleek hair, the crimson lipstick. He saw the cold, mocking smile on my face. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He realized I had done this. "Catherine," he whispered, his voice cracking. I raised my coffee cup to him in a silent, mocking toast. "Move it, Captain." The MP shoved him forward, dragging him out of the restaurant in front of half the town's elite. Beatrice was left sitting alone, her face burning with humiliation as whispers broke out across the patio. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out, leaving a generous tip on the table. The war had officially begun, and I had just fired the first cannon. By Wednesday, Fort Bragg was buzzing with rumors. Captain Edward had been dragged out of a country club by MPs. Though he tested completely sober and was released with a stern warning about conduct unbecoming, the damage to his spotless reputation had been done. To make matters worse, Dylan had gone to the bank on Tuesday morning to withdraw funds for his upcoming promotion gala, only to find $5.12 to his name. My newly retained lawyer, Richard Hayes, a shark of a man who loved high-profile divorces, had informed me that Dylan had tried calling the firm a dozen times, screaming threats. "Let him scream," Richard had chuckled over the phone. "I filed the petition for divorce citing infidelity, and I've frozen all marital assets pending discovery. You hold all the cards, Mrs. Edward." "Not all of them," I replied. "I need him to bleed publicly." Friday night was the Fort Bragg Annual Officers' Gala. It was the most important social event of the year, where promotions were unofficially secured and alliances were forged. Dylan was slated to be announced for his promotion to major. I spent Friday afternoon getting ready. I didn't just want to look beautiful. I wanted to look like a weapon. I chose a floor-length emerald green silk gown with a daring slit up the thigh and a plunging neckline that the old Catherine wouldn't have dared to look at, let alone wear. I paired it with my mother's vintage diamond choker. When I pulled the Fairmont into the crowded parking lot of the Officers Club at 8 p.m., I could hear the muted sounds of a swing band and the clinking of glasses. The air smelled of expensive bourbon cigar smoke and heavy perfume. I walked up the grand stone steps and handed my coat to the bewildered young private at the door. I didn't have an invitation, but as the wife of a captain, my military eye granted me full access. I pushed the heavy mahogany doors open. The ballroom was spectacular, dripping in gold chandeliers and velvet drapery. Men in pristine dress uniforms and women in glittering 80s ball gowns milled about. I stood at the top of the sweeping staircase for a moment, letting the crowd notice me. Slowly, heads began to turn. Conversations died out. Women leaned in to whisper to their husbands. I descended the stairs with agonizing slowness, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble. I spotted them near the champagne fountain. Dylan, looking incredibly stressed, was whispering furiously to his mother Martha, who was wearing a ghastly plum-colored taffeta gown. Not far from them, trying to look inconspicuous, was Beatrice Gallagher standing beside her father, the imposing General Gallagher. Martha saw me first. Her jaw literally dropped, her eyes bulging behind her thick spectacles. She smacked Dylan's arm, pointing a trembling, bejeweled finger at me. Dylan turned. The blood drained from his face so fast, I thought he might faint. I didn't walk toward them. I walked straight to the center of the room, intercepting General Gallagher just as he was making his way toward the bar. General Gallagher. I said, my voice projecting clearly over the suddenly quiet room. The general, a burly man with a chest full of medals and a stern gray mustache, stopped. He looked me up and down, clearly appreciative, but confused. Yes, ma'am. Have we met? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Dylan rushing toward us, panic making his movements jerky and desperate. General, sir, please excuse my wife. She's not been well. I am perfectly well, Dylan. I cut him off, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. I turned my attention back to the general. I am Catherine Edward, Captain Edward's wife. General Gallagher frowned, glancing between Dylan's panicked face and my calm one. Mrs. Edward, Dylan here was just telling me you were away visiting a sick aunt. Was he? I smiled, a cold, sharp thing. How thoughtful of him to cover for me. But I haven't been visiting an aunt. I've been with my attorneys. Gas rippled through the immediate crowd. Dylan lunged forward, grabbing my elbow. Catherine, stop this right now. You are making a scene. Let's go outside. I ripped my arm out of his grasp so violently he stumbled. Don't you ever touch me again. I reached into my sequined clutch and pulled out a thick manila envelope. General Gallagher, I said, my voice ringing with authority. Dylan has been aggressively lobbying for a promotion to major. He has spent the last year telling you about his dedication, his moral compass, and his family values. Catherine, shut up, Martha hissed suddenly, appearing at Dylan's side, trying to step between me and the general. General, she is hysterical. She needs a doctor. What I need, Martha, is a pen. I unclasped the envelope. General, inside this envelope are photographs, sworn affidavits from private investigators, and hotel receipts spanning the last 8 months. Beatrice Gallagher, standing a few feet behind her father, let out a tiny, horrified squeak. Receipts for what Mrs. Edward, the general, asked, his voice suddenly dangerously low, his eyes narrowing at Dylan. Receipts proving that Captain Edward has been using marital funds to finance a long-term illicit affair, I announced. I turned slowly, locking eyes with Beatrice, whose face had gone chalk white. With your daughter, Beatrice. The silence that fell over the ballroom was absolute. It was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. General Gallagher stiffened his neck, turning a violent shade of red. He slowly turned his head to look at his daughter. Is this true? Beatrice burst into tears, covering her face and turning to run toward the women's restroom. That was all the confirmation he needed. The general turned back to Dylan. The look in his eyes was lethal. "Captain." "Sir, I can explain." "She threw herself at me, I swear." Dylan pleaded, his voice breaking in sheer terror. He actually pointed a finger at the retreating back of the general's daughter. It was the most cowardly thing I had ever witnessed, and it sealed his fate. "You son of a bitch!" the general growled, his voice vibrating with rage. Before Dylan could defend himself, I stepped forward and slapped the manila envelope hard against Dylan's chest. Instinctively, he grabbed it. "Consider yourself served, Dylan," I said brightly. "I want the house. I want my father's money, and I want my maiden name back. Have your lawyer call mine." I didn't wait for his response. I didn't need to. The destruction in his eyes was all the closure I required. I turned on my heel and walked back toward the grand staircase, the sea of military elite parting for me like the Red Sea. "Catherine!" Martha wailed behind me, the sound echoing through the ballroom. "You ruined us. You ruined him." I paused at the door, glancing back over my shoulder at the pathetic broken tableau. Dylan was shrinking away from a furious General Gallagher. Martha was sobbing into her taffeta dress, and the entire Fort Bragg hierarchy was watching a golden boy burn to the ground. "I didn't ruin him, Martha," I said softly, though I knew the whole room heard me. "I just turned on the lights. I pushed the mahogany doors open and stepped out into the cool night air." But as the valet brought my car around, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit stepped out from the shadows of the club's columns. He was lighting a cigarette, the flare of the match illuminating a sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes. "That was quite the execution, Mrs. Edward E." He drawled, his voice deep and slightly amused. I froze my hand on the door handle of my car. "Who are you?" He stepped forward, blowing a thin stream of smoke into the night air. "Name's Harrison. Harrison Cole. I'm an investigator for the Department of Defense, and judging by the fire you just started in there." He smiled, pulling a sleek silver badge from his pocket. "I think you and I are hunting the exact same man. But you don't know the half of what your husband has actually been up to." Cold rain began to drizzle, dampening the shoulders of Harrison Cole's tailored wool suit, but he didn't seem to notice. He just stood there, smoking his cigarette, looking at me with those piercing blue eyes that seemed to strip away the elegant emerald gown and see the battle-hardened woman underneath. "Hunting," I echoed, my hand tightening on my purse. "Dylan is a cheating coward and a gold digger. He isn't smart enough to warrant a Department of Defense investigator." Harrison chuckled, a low, raspy sound. He flicked his cigarette onto the wet asphalt and crushed it beneath his polished shoe. "You underestimate your soon-to-be ex-husband, Mrs. Edward. Or maybe you just overestimate his loyalty to the uniform. Let's get out of the cold. I know a diner off Highway 24 that pours a decent cup of coffee and doesn't ask questions." Curiosity, sharp and demanding, clawed at my chest. In my previous life, Dylan had always seemed perfectly insulated by military bureaucracy. Even when his finances mysteriously ballooned in the early 90s, he claimed it was from brilliant stock investments. Was it possible my entire first life had been built on an even deeper foundation of lies? I nodded, gesturing for him to follow my Ford Fairmont. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a cracked red vinyl booth at Rosie's all-night diner. The air smelled of stale grease and cheap filter coffee. Harrison slid a plain manila folder across the Formica table. "Dylan is a logistics officer in the Quartermaster Corps." Harrison began, keeping his voice barely above a murmur. For the last 14 months, high-grade military inventory has been vanishing from Fort Bragg and Camp McCall. We're not talking about missing boots or MRS Catherine. We are talking about Class 5 supplies, ammunition, night vision optics, and experimental encrypted comms units. Stuff that ends up in the hands of overseas warlords. I stared at the black and white surveillance photos inside the folder. There was Dylan standing by a loading dock at 2 a.m. handing a clipboard to a man in a civilian trucker hat. You think Dylan is stealing them? I breathed the puzzle pieces of my past life violently rearranging themselves. I know he is, Harrison corrected. But he's just a middleman. He's falsifying the manifest records and routing the shipments to civilian blind drops. The problem is, I don't have his ledger. Without the physical proof of his offshore accounts, and the buyer contacts General Richard Higgins at Central Command, won't authorize a raid. Dylan has covered his tracks too well on paper. I leaned back against the vinyl booth, my mind racing. The $50,000. Dylan hadn't needed my father's inheritance just to bribe superior officers for a promotion. In my past life, he had lost a shipment or owed a massive debt to some very dangerous people. I had unwittingly bailed a traitor out of a black market death sentence. Why approach me? I asked, looking up at Harrison. I just publicly humiliated him. I served him divorce papers. He isn't going to tell me anything. Because, Catherine, you are the only person who had unrestricted access to his home, and you still have the keys, Harrison said, leaning forward, his eyes intense. After the stunt you just pulled at the officers' club, Dylan is going to panic. General Gallagher is probably tearing his military career to shreds as we speak. When rats panic, they try to secure their nest egg. Dylan will try to move the ledger tonight. A visceral memory slammed into me. The cedar chest. In my first life, Dylan kept a heavy iron-bound cedar chest in the dusty crawl space beneath our military housing unit. He told me it contained classified deployment documents and explicitly forbade me from ever touching it. Martha had fiercely guarded that rule, once slapping me across the face when I went down there simply to retrieve a box of winter coats. I know where it is, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Harrison's eyebrows shot up. Where? In our basement. But we have to go right now. If Dylan calls his mother from the base detention room, she'll destroy it before we even pull into the driveway. Harrison didn't hesitate. He threw a $5 bill on the table and stood up. Leave your car here. We'll take my sedan. It has government plates. The gate guards won't stop us. Speeding through the dark, winding roads of Fort Bragg in the passenger seat of Harrison's unmarked Plymouth Fury, my heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about severing the rot at its root. Harrison bypassed the main security checkpoint, flashing his DOD badge to a terrified young corporal, and we sped into the residential sector. The Edwards house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a perfectly manicured lie of domestic bliss. Lights are on in the kitchen and the living room. Harrison noted, killing the headlights as we rolled to a stop 2 houses down. Someone is awake. Martha, I said grimly. She left the gala right after I did. She's probably packing his bags or trying to hide his sins. I cannot legally enter that house without a warrant. Catherine, Harrison said, his tone dead serious. If I find the ledger, it gets thrown out of court as an illegal search. You, however, are still a legal resident. You can invite me in. Consider yourself a guest of honor, I replied, grabbing my purse. Oh. We walked quickly across the damp lawns, avoiding the glow of the street lamps. I slid my key into the front door lock. It turned with a quiet click. I pushed the door open, stepping into the hallway. The house reeked of burnt paper and sheer panic.
"Dylan, is that you?"
Martha's voice wailed from the kitchen.
"Did that idiot Gallagher let you go? Oh."
I stepped into the kitchen, Harrison a silent shadow behind me. Martha was standing by the sink, frantically feeding scraps of paper into the roaring garbage disposal. On the kitchen island sat the heavy iron-bound cedar chest from the crawl space. Its padlock had been smashed open with a hammer. Stacks of bundled $100 bills and a thick black leather notebook spilled out onto the counter. "Hello, Martha," I said coolly. Martha spun around, shrieking and dropping a handful of receipts. When she saw me, her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. You filthy, ungrateful witch! Look what you've done. Dylan called me from the MP station. General Gallagher is trying to have him court-martialed for conduct unbecoming. And now you dare show your face in my son's house. It's military housing, Martha. Technically, it belongs to the taxpayers. I countered, my eyes fixed on the black notebook, the ledger. And from the looks of what you're trying to destroy, Dylan is going to be facing a lot worse than a conduct charge. Martha stepped in front of the island, shielding the cash and the notebook with her body. I don't know what you're talking about. These are Dylan's savings. Don't play dumb, Mrs. Edward, Harrison said, stepping out from behind me. He flashed his silver badge. Harrison Cole, Department of Defense. Step away from the evidence. Martha froze, the color draining from her face so completely she looked like a corpse. Her eyes darted from the badge to Harrison, then to the smashed cedar chest. In that split second, the facade of the righteous, moral mother-in-law shattered completely. She wasn't just a bystander. She knew exactly how Dylan had been funding her lavish shopping sprees and expensive jewelry. He didn't do anything wrong. Martha stammered, her voice trembling. The military doesn't pay him enough for his brilliance. He deserves this money. We deserve it. By selling Kevlar and night vision to foreign mercenaries. I asked, my disgust raw and palpable. You really are despicable, Martha. Both of you. Suddenly, Martha lunged. She didn't go for me. She grabbed the heavy cast iron skillet sitting on the stove and swung it wildly at Harrison's head. Harrison ducked effortlessly, catching her wrist with one large hand and twisting it until she dropped the pan with a clatter. Assaulting a federal agent, he noted dryly, pinning her arm behind her back. Keep stacking the charges, Martha. While he held a screaming thrashing, Martha, I walked over to the kitchen island. I picked up the black leather notebook. Opening it, I saw pages upon pages of meticulously recorded dates, manifest numbers, buyer aliases, and offshore account routing numbers. It was a gold mine. It was the exact rope Dylan had used to hang himself. We have it, I told Harrison, flipping the book shut. You can't do this. Martha sobbed, her bouffant hair falling wildly into her face. Catherine, please, he's your husband. He promised to take care of you. He promised to drain me dry and leave me to die. I said softly, the memory of my cold kitchen floor flashing before my eyes. But I'm awake now. Red and blue lights suddenly strobed through the kitchen windows, painting the walls in frantic colors. Tires screeched in the driveway. Looks like General Higgins finally got my message and sent the cavalry, Harrison said, releasing Martha and pushing her gently but firmly toward one of the kitchen chairs. She collapsed into it, burying her face in her hands. Heavy fists pounded on the front door. Military police, open up. I walked to the front door and pulled it open. 3 armed MPs stood on the porch. Gentlemen, I said, stepping aside and pointing toward the kitchen. You'll find Department of Defense Investigator Cole in the kitchen. along with $70,000 in stolen cash, the black market ledger, and an accomplice trying to destroy evidence. The officers rushed past me. I stood on the porch inhaling the cold, clean night air. The rain had stopped. Dylan's empire was burning. His mother was in cuffs and I was holding the match. But as Harrison walked out onto the porch, slipping the black notebook into an evidence bag, he looked down at me with a serious expression. "You did good tonight, Catherine," he said quietly. "But the name's in this book." Dylan was dealing with a cartel operating out of Miami led by a man named Victor the Ghost Vargas. When Vargas finds out his Fort Bragg supply line just got severed by a scorned wife, he isn't going to care about your divorce proceedings. Harrison leaned in closer, his voice dark with warning. Dylan was the spark, but you just lit a powder keg, and tomorrow they are going to come looking for whoever blew up their operation. Sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford. I spent the remainder of the weekend locked inside a windowless interrogation room at Fort Bragg's military intelligence headquarters, drinking black coffee from a styrofoam cup. Harrison Cole sat across from me, his sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faint scars. The black leather ledger we had seized from my kitchen island lay open between us. "Victor Vargas," Harrison repeated, dragging a hand down his tired face. "He's a ghost, Catherine. The DEA knows he operates out of Miami moving cocaine and illegal armaments, but they can't pin a single physical address to his name. And now, thanks to Dylan's spectacular failure, Vargas is out $3 million worth of military hardware. Cartel bosses don't just write off losses. They balance the books with blood." I stared at the scribbled names in Dylan's handwriting. A cold wave of adrenaline washed over me. In my previous life, I'd been an isolated, beaten-down housewife who barely read the newspaper. But I remembered the agonizingly long days spent in hospital waiting rooms in the late 80s when Dylan first developed his heart issues. The hospital televisions were always glued to the news. Memory sharp and sudden pierced through the fog of exhaustion. I remembered a massive federal raid broadcasted on CNN in the summer of 1988. It had been hailed as the biggest blow to the Miami cartel network in a decade. "Harrison," I said, slowly tapping my manicured fingernail against the ledger. Dylan wasn't shipping the hardware directly to Miami. He couldn't. The logistics are too complex for a single captain to manage without raising red flags at the way stations. "Exactly," Harrison sighed. "He had a relay point, a blind drop, but the ledger only uses a symbol for the destination, a little crudely drawn anchor." I closed my eyes, visualizing the television screen from my past life. The news anchor's voice echoed in my mind. "Authorities have seized hundreds of crates of stolen military weapons hidden inside frozen seafood shipments." "It's a seafood import company," I said, my eyes snapping open. "On the coast of South Carolina, Charleston." Harrison stopped flipping through his notes and stared at me. "How could you possibly know that we've had analysts staring at this book for 12 hours? "Because Dylan hated seafood," I lied smoothly, leaning forward. "He was deathly allergic to shellfish. Yet about 6 months ago I found a matchbook in his dress blues from a place called Neptune's Catch Imports down in Charleston. He hit me across the face for digging in his pockets and told me never to mention it. Why would a man allergic to seafood keep a matchbook from a wholesale fish market? No, it was a complete fabrication to cover my future knowledge, but the logic was ironclad. Harrison's blue eyes darkened with realization. He grabbed the phone on the metal table and dialed an internal extension. "Get me the regional director for the DEA in Charleston." Harrison barked into the receiver. "I need a wiretap and aerial surveillance on a commercial warehouse, Neptune's Catch Imports, immediately." He slammed the phone down and looked at me, a mixture of awe and suspicion on his face. "If you're right, Catherine, you just handed us the entire cartel distribution hub on a silver platter. But it also means you are in more danger than I thought." Before I could respond, the heavy steel door of the interrogation room swung open. A young, breathless MP stepped in, holding a small, pristine white jewelry box. "Sir," the MP addressed Harrison, though his eyes darted nervously to me. "This was just delivered to the front gate, addressed to Mrs. Edward. The courier said it was a gift from an old friend down south." Harrison's posture instantly went rigid. "Don't touch it. Put it on the table and step back." The MP placed the box on the metal table and practically sprinted out of the room. Harrison pulled a pair of latex gloves from his jacket pocket, snapped them on, and carefully lifted the lid. My breath caught in my throat. Inside the box, resting on black velvet, was a silver military dog tag. My name, Catherine Edward, was stamped into the metal, but wrapped around the chain was a single dried black rose petal. "They know where I am." I whispered, the reality of the cartel's reach settling into my bones. "They know I'm the one who blew the whistle." "Vargas is sending a message," Harrison said grimly, closing the box. "He's telling us that military gates and federal agents can't protect you. He's coming. Let him come." I said, surprising myself with the steady, venomous tone of my own voice. In my first life, I had died a victim choking on the kitchen floor, while my husband walked over my body to be with his mistress. I was not going to let a cowardly drug lord put me back in a grave. "Harrison, if Vargas wants me dead, he's going to have to send someone to do it. Someone who knows what I look like. Someone who knows Fort Bragg." I looked up, meeting his intense gaze. "We need bait." "Absolutely not," Harrison growled, slamming his hands on the table. "I am not using a civilian as bait for a cartel hit squad. I'm putting you in a secure bunker until this blows over." "It will never blow over." I shot back, standing up so abruptly my chair scraped against the concrete floor. "If we don't end this now, I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. We have a weapon we haven't used yet." "What weapon?" "Dylan." I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "Vargas's men don't know Dylan has been arrested yet. The military has kept the raid classified. What if Dylan calls his cartel contact and sets up an emergency meeting?" A panic drop. "Dylan is facing 20 years in Leavenworth," Harrison pointed out. "He's currently sitting in the brig, refusing to speak to anyone without his lawyer. He won't cooperate with us." "He won't cooperate with you," I corrected, grabbing my purse. "Take me to him. I know exactly which buttons to push to make my dear husband sing like a canary." The Fort Bragg detention facility smelled of bleach-stale sweat and utter defeat. Harrison led me down a narrow corridor lined with steel doors. My emerald gala gown from Friday night had been traded for a sharp, tailored black trench coat and flat boots. I needed to look like a woman holding an executioner's axe, not a wounded wife. "You have 10 minutes, Harrison murmured, pausing before cell block 4. "I'll be monitoring the audio from the adjacent room. If he tries anything, I'll be through that door in 2 seconds." "He won't try anything," I replied coldly. "Dylan is a bully, and bullies are inherently cowards when stripped of their power." Harrison nodded, unlocking the heavy metal door. I stepped inside. Dylan was sitting on a metal cot dressed in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. He looked horrific. The Golden Boy military captain was gone. His sandy blonde hair was greasy, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had chewed his fingernails down to the quick. When he looked up and saw me, a complex mixture of rage, relief, and desperation washed over his face. Catherine, he breathed, standing up quickly. He moved toward the plexiglass partition that separated us, pressing his hands against it. You came. God, I knew you wouldn't just abandon me. I didn't sit in the metal chair provided. I stood perfectly straight, letting the silence stretch until it became suffocating. I didn't come to save you, Dylan. I said, my voice as hard as diamond. I came to deliver a message. His face contorted, the brief flash of hope dying instantly. You did this to me. You ruined my life. You planted that ledger. Do not insult my intelligence. I snapped, stepping closer to the glass. You built your own gallows. I merely kicked the trap door. But your impending court-martial is the least of your problems right now. I pulled a small, pristine white jewelry box from my trench coat pocket and slid it through the security slot at the bottom of the plexiglass. Dylan picked it up with trembling hands. When he saw the dog tag and the black rose petal, he dropped the box as if it were coated in acid. He stumbled backward, hitting the metal cot, his chest heaving with sudden violent panic. Where did you get that? He choked out, his eyes wide with genuine terror. It was delivered to me this morning, courtesy of Victor Vargas. I crossed my arms, watching him sweat. Your boss is very unhappy, Dylan. $3 million worth of merchandise seized, and the golden goose is sitting in a cage. He's going to kill me, Dylan whispered, running a shaking hand through his hair. He thinks I gave him up. Kathy, you have to tell them. Tell the DOD I didn't say anything. Tell them I protected the network. Why would I do that? I asked, tilting my head. As far as Vargas knows, you traded his operation for a plea deal. In fact, that's exactly what the rumor mill is saying. And once you go to federal prison, the cartel will ensure you don't survive your first week. Dylan fell to his knees on the concrete floor, pressing his face against the plexiglass. Tears streamed down his face. It was a pathetic display, entirely devoid of the smug superiority he had worn like armor for 20 years. Please, he begged, his voice breaking. Please, Catherine, I'll give you everything. The house, the cars, I won't fight the divorce. Just get me protective custody. Please. Protective custody requires cooperation. Dylan, I said, smoothly leaning down until we were eye to eye through the thick glass. Vargas sent a hit squad for me because I'm the loose end. I want them caught. I want the men who delivered this box. How? He sobbed. You are going to make a phone call, I commanded. You are going to call your local contact. You will tell them you managed to evade arrest on Friday night and you have a secondary stash of encrypted radios that the feds missed. Tell them you need an emergency extraction at the old rail yard outside of Fayetteville tonight at midnight. You will tell them to send the cleaners. If they find out it's a trap, they'll slaughter us all. Dylan protested, trembling violently. If you don't make the call, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper, I will personally leak the manifest from Neptune's catch imports to the press. And I will tell the reporters that Captain Dylan Edward provided the intel. Dylan gasped, looking at me as if I were a demon crawled straight out of hell. How do you know about Neptune that was classified? I know everything, Dylan. I interrupted, standing back up and smoothing my coat. I know about the blind drops. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about Beatrice. And I know that you are completely, utterly out of options. You have 5 seconds to decide. I turned my back to him, counting loudly. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'll do it, Dylan screamed, burying his face in his hands. I'll make the call. Just promise me they'll protect me. Harrison, I said clearly, knowing the investigator was listening through the wire. "Bring the captain a telephone." The door behind me opened immediately. Harrison stepped in, holding a heavy black rotary phone attached to a recording device. He looked at Dylan's weeping form on the floor, then looked at me, a profound respect gleaming in his eyes. "Get up, Captain," Harrison ordered gruffly, placing the phone on the metal table inside the cell. "Time to dial." As Dylan shakily picked up the receiver to seal the fate of his cartel handlers, I felt a profound sense of closure wash over me. The man who had caused my death was now begging for his life completely at my mercy. The trap was set. Now all we had to do was wait for the wolves to arrive at midnight. And this time the sheep was holding a shotgun. Midnight rain slicked the rusted tracks of the abandoned Fayetteville rail yard, turning the rusted metal into jagged bleeding veins under the pale moonlight. The air was heavy thick with the metallic scent of ozone and impending violence. I crouched in the damp shadows of a decaying signal tower, a heavy Kevlar vest strapped tightly over my trench coat. "Keep your head down, Catherine," Harrison Cole murmured, his breath ghosting in the cold air. He was kneeling beside me, his eyes glued to the sniper scope of his rifle. "When the shooting starts, you do not move from this concrete pillar. Understood?" "I'm not a fragile little bird, Harrison," I replied softly, my eyes fixed on the clearing below. "But I have no intention of catching a cartel bullet. Just make sure you don't miss." Down in the muddy clearing, illuminated only by the weak flickering glow of a single halogen work light, stood Dylan. He looked pathetic. They had stripped him of his uniform and dressed him in civilian clothes, wrapping him in a bulky, bulletproof vest hidden beneath an oversized parka. He was pacing frantically, his breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. He looked exactly like what he was, a rat backed into a corner. "Showtime." Harrison whispered, his finger tightening on the trigger guard. The low, guttural growl of heavy engines broke the silence. Two black matte-painted Chevrolet Suburbans rolled out of the tree line, their headlights cut moving like predators in the dark. They idled to a stop 20 yards from Dylan. The doors opened with synchronized, deadly precision. 4 men stepped out. They weren't low-level street thugs. They were professionals. They wore dark tactical gear and carried suppressed submachine guns. Leading them was a man with a jagged scar running from his ear to his collarbone, Dominic Russo Victor Vargas, top enforcer. "Edward." Russo barked, his voice echoing off the corrugated steel of the abandoned boxcars. "You look like hell. Where is the merchandise?" Dylan trembled so violently I could see it from the tower. It's in the red container over there. Encrypted comms. Millions of dollars worth. But you have to get me out of here, Dominic. The feds raided my house. My wife, Catherine. She set me up." A cold spike of disgust drove through my chest. Even now, with his life hanging by a thread, Dylan's first instinct was to throw me to the wolves. Russo didn't move toward the container. He narrowed his dark eyes, scanning the darkness. "Your wife?" "The little military housewife blew our supply line. Vargas told me to clean up the mess, Captain. And right now, you are the biggest stain on the floor." Russo raised his weapon, aiming directly at Dylan's chest. "Vargas sends his regards." "No, wait. I can give you the DOD investigator's name. I can—" "Take them!" Harrison's voice roared over the tactical radio. The rail yard erupted into blinding light. High-intensity floodlights mounted by the tactical team on the surrounding boxcars snapped on, bathing the clearing in daylight. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," a voice boomed over a megaphone. Russo didn't hesitate. He swung his rifle toward the floodlights and opened fire. The suppressed pops of the cartel weapons were instantly drowned out by the deafening roar of military-grade return fire. Dylan screamed, diving into the mud and covering his head with his arms, weeping like an infant. The firefight was brutal, but brutally short. The tactical element of surprise was overwhelming. 2 of the cartel soldiers dropped instantly, clutching their legs and shoulders. The third threw his weapon down and raised his hands. But Russo, moving with the terrifying speed of a seasoned killer, dove behind the Suburban and sprinted toward the only blind spot in the floodlights, the rusted signal tower, where Harrison and I were positioned. "He's coming up the stairs," Harrison shouted, dropping his sniper rifle and drawing his sidearm. "Catherine, stay back." Heavy boots pounded against the rusted iron grating of the stairs. Russo burst through the trap door of the tower platform, his gun raised. Harrison fired twice. One bullet caught Russo in the shoulder, spinning him around, but the enforcer lunged forward, tackling Harrison to the grated floor. The gun clattered out of Harrison's hand, sliding toward the edge of the platform. Russo pulled a hunting knife from his belt, pinning Harrison down the blade, inching toward the investigator's throat. Harrison grunted, both hands locked onto Russo's wrists, fighting the downward pressure. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. The 22-year-old Catherine would have fainted. The reborn Catherine moved on pure instinct. I grabbed the heavy solid steel flashlight Harrison had left on the crate. I stepped forward, raised it with both hands, and brought it down with every ounce of strength I possessed onto the back of Russo's skull. There was a sickening crunch. Russo's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed sideways like a sack of dead weight, the knife clattering harmlessly to the floor. Harrison heaved the unconscious man off him, gasping for air. He looked up at me, his blue eyes wide with genuine shock. I stood over the cartel enforcer, my chest heaving. The steel flashlight still gripped tightly in my hands. "I told you." I breathed, my voice shaking only slightly. "I'm not a fragile bird." Harrison let out a breathless chuckle, wiping a smear of grease from his jaw. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, Mrs. Edward." "It's Wright," I corrected him, dropping the flashlight. "Catherine Wright." From the mud below, the piercing wail of police sirens flooded the rail yard. The trap had slammed shut. But as Harrison cuffed Russo to the iron railing, a harsh burst of static crackled from the heavy tactical radio strapped to Russo's tactical vest. "Dominic, report. Is the captain dead?" The voice was thick, smooth, and heavily accented. Victor Vargas, the ghost himself. I knelt down, unclipped the radio from Russo's chest, and pressed the transmission button before Harrison could stop me. "Dominic is a little tied up at the moment, Mr. Vargas," I said, my voice echoing coldly into the night. A heavy silence fell over the radio waves. "Who is this?" "This is the woman who just burned your East Coast distribution network to the ground," I replied, staring out over the flashing red and blue lights below. "Your men are in federal custody. The shipment in Charleston is currently being seized by the DEA. And if you ever send a piece of jewelry to my home again, I will personally come to Miami and hand-deliver the matching set to your front door." I didn't wait for his response. I released the button, dropped the radio on the metal floor, and crushed it beneath the heel of my boot. Harrison stood up, staring at the shattered plastic. "You just threatened a cartel boss. You know that, right?" "No, Harrison," I said, turning to face him, a genuine smile finally breaking across my face. "I just informed him that he's no longer the scariest thing in the dark." Oh, spring of 1988 brought cherry blossoms to North Carolina, and with them the sweet, intoxicating scent of absolute justice. The military tribunal for Captain Dylan Edward was the most highly publicized court-martial of the decade. They didn't allow cameras inside the federal courthouse, but they didn't need to. The sketch artist captured every agonizing detail of Dylan's spectacular fall from grace. Sitting in the front row of the gallery, wearing a pristine white tailored suit that signaled my complete and utter rebirth, I watched the judge hand down the sentence. Dylan Edward for the charges of grand larceny, treasonous distribution of military assets, and conspiracy. You are hereby stripped of your rank, dishonorably discharged, and sentenced to 25 years in the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Leavenworth. Dylan didn't look at me. He kept his head bowed, his shoulders shaking, as the MPs shackled his wrists and led him out of the courtroom. The golden boy of Fort Bragg was dead buried under the weight of his own monstrous ego. Martha Edward didn't fare much better. 2 weeks later, she stood in a civilian federal court. The prosecution played the audio recordings of her attempting to destroy federal evidence and funnel illicit cartel funds into offshore accounts. She was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for fraud and obstruction of justice. As the bailiffs led her away, she caught my eye from the aisle. "Catherine," she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please tell them I didn't know. Tell them Dylan manipulated me. I'm an old woman." I looked at her, remembering the decades of psychological torture she had inflicted upon me in my past life. I remembered the burned pot roast, the cruel remarks, the way she had cheered when Dylan left me to die. I adjusted the collar of my silk blouse and offered her a tiny, freezing smile. "Enjoy the cafeteria food, Martha. I hear it's a step up from your cooking." She screamed something foul as the doors slammed shut behind her, but the sound didn't touch me. The chains were gone. The fallout was sweeping. General Gallacher, humiliated by his daughter's very public affair with a convicted traitor, was forced into early retirement. Beatrice, stripped of her social standing and shunned by the military elite, quietly moved out of state. I, however, stayed, armed with my $50,000 inheritance now safely ballooned by the divorce settlement that awarded me the house, and every cent of Dylan's legal assets. I walked into a private investment firm in downtown Fayetteville. I knew exactly which tech startups and real estate markets were going to explode in the 1990s. I wasn't just going to be independent, I was going to be an empire. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after the rail yard ambush. I was sitting at a corner table in a high-end bistro, reviewing the blueprints for a commercial property I was purchasing, when a shadow fell over my table. I looked up. Harrison Cole was standing there, out of his usual dark suits, wearing a casual leather jacket and a faint smirk. I heard a rumor that the most dangerous woman in North Carolina was buying up half the commercial district. Harrison drawled, pulling out a chair and sitting down uninvited. "Just the profitable half-investigator Cole," I replied, closing the blueprints. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Did Victor Vargas finally figure out how to use the post office again? Harrison chuckled, signaling the waiter for 2 coffees. "Vargas is currently sitting in a Supermax facility in Colorado. The DEA used the Charleston Ledger to dismantle his entire operation. You're officially off the endangered species list, Catherine." A profound sense of relief washed over me. The final thread of my past life had been severed. "So what brings the DOD to my table?" I asked, leaning forward, resting my chin on my hand. Harrison met my gaze, his piercing blue eyes softer than I had ever seen them. "The case is closed. I'm taking some leave time. I figured I owed you a real dinner, one that doesn't involve black coffee, bulletproof vests, or cartel enforcers." I studied his face. In my first life, I had chosen a man based on the uniform he wore and the illusions he projected. I had chosen submission. This time, looking at the man who had fought beside me, who had treated me not as a subordinate, but as a weapon to be respected, I felt something entirely new. I felt equal. A real dinner? I mused, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my lips. I think I'd like that, Harrison. But I'm driving. He laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the space between us. I wouldn't have it any other way. As I walked out of the bistro that afternoon, the sunlight warming my face, I realized the ultimate truth of my second chance. I hadn't just survived my death. I had conquered it. The naive, broken girl who bled out on a linoleum floor was gone forever. I was Catherine Wright. I was reborn. I was rich. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was entirely beautifully free. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey of rebirth and revenge. Catherine's story is a powerful reminder that it is never too late to take back your power. Stand up to toxic manipulation and rewrite your own destiny. If you love the twists, the drama, and the ultimate downfall of Dylan and Martha, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a dramatic story. Comment down below. What was your favorite moment of Catherine's revenge? See you in the next one.